Welcome to the end of the world, survivors. You are tuned into this station, one of the last voices on the airwaves. I'm Harper, broadcasting from a radio station that somehow still hums with life. I am no longer alone, and my friends and I are looking for the author of Robert's Rules of Chaos while we rebuild and forge new alliances. This is where we build our society. There is no going back. But as we forge forward, creating a new world order, I'll share stories of your fellow survivors and how the Robert's Rules of Chaos have helped them survive, or at least given them some goalposts to focus on. I'll be your guide through the madness, sharing the locations of safe havens, theories, and information about our new world, and the occasional existential crisis that comes with a zompocalypse. The world's gone dark, the dead outnumber the living, but we are surviving and rebuilding. The old world is gone, but we are adapting to surviving in this new world and the new rules that come with surviving the zombie menace. Stick around if you're still alive. Welcome, survivors. This is DJ Harper, and you are listening to the Zombie Apocalypse Survivor Radio. Today, we're talking about Robert's Rules of Chaos, specifically rule number 5. Do not attract the dead. Our goal is not to fight the enemy. If we are to survive, our goals must be to destroy the enemy or to avoid them entirely. We need to ensure that any battles are on our terms, not theirs. Those who decide the time and place of battle are most often the victors. We must take care to never attract or encourage attacks against us unless we are luring the enemy into a trap. The enemy is attracted to light, heat, the smells of blood or burning, the sounds of humanity, and the sight of humans, especially in combination. We must remember this and take precautions not to carelessly draw the enemy to us. Avoid open outdoor fires, especially at night. When we have to build a campfire, it should be covert to keep the light from the fires undetected and to create as little smoke as possible. Everyone should know how to build a Dakota Fire hole, so walkers are not lured to a campsite when traveling outdoors. Burn barrels are also useful as long as the flames don't reach high enough to be seen from any distance. Needless to say, open wounds should be bandaged and covered as soon as possible, and any large amounts of blood on the floor, walls, or ground should be cleaned as quickly and as thoroughly as possible if any humans are going to stay in the vicinity. Indoor fires and lights aren't a problem as long as they are reasonably masked to keep the light from shining out of the building. Similarly, the smell of blood and the sounds of most human activities are reasonably contained by the walls of a building, but caution is still advised. Do not play loud music that can be heard from outside your shelter. Do not engage in boisterous conversation. Do not engage in loud construction activities unless you are trying to lure the enemy into an ambush or are fully prepared for the consequences of detection. The odors of cooked meat does not seem to attract the dead when the cooking is done indoors, but cooking meat outdoors does, because of the combination of other factors like the sights and sounds of humans and so forth. When practicing with firearms, only do so away from your shelter, and when you have an easy escape route and/or enough security to take care of any problems that arise. When using firearms or explosives to put the walking dead to rest, the sound is an advantage because it makes an excellent lure, but always be cautious not to get overconfident and consequently overwhelmed. So, we are going to go over the Dakota Fire pit one more time. I was told that I didn't explain it quite well enough, and there were questions, confusion, and the person who told me about them said that I didn't really do it justice. So Right off the bat, some places that you should avoid digging in. Areas where the ground is very rocky, it will be harder to dig your hole with rocks in the way. I was given notes, by the way. Someplace where the soil is too loose or sandy, if the soil can't keep its shape, it's not going to keep the hole, the tunnel won't be able to stay a tunnel, etc. So you're going to spend a lot of time redigging a hole that just keeps collapsing on you. Tree roots that you have to cut through, or someplace where the hole fills with water easily. What you need is a flat surface that has been cleared of vegetation and debris, a spade or shovel to do your digging, but you can use a sturdy stick if you don't have a spade or shovel. You know, there are a lot of times we find ourselves outside without those things. And ideally, rocks to hold your pot. So the first thing to do is to check out your location. You want to make sure that the soil is the right kind of soil. You want to make sure that you're keeping an eye out for anything that might be a hazard, such as flooding or fire, and changes in the weather conditions, because the direction the wind is blowing is of prime importance to your hole. So once you've done all of that, you need to figure out which way the wind is blowing, because the you have a fire hole and you have an oxygen hole. The oxygen hole, which needs to be dug at a downward slope and, upwind of the fire hole, you want the air to blow into the oxygen hole, right? So you want the wind blowing into it. So you build it on a downward slope as opposed to straight down. That way it's catching a little bit more air to feed the fire. So mark your holes. This is an important step because you need to position them in the right place if you want the fire pit to work. Oxygen chamber should be around 8 inches or 20 centimeters in diameter and aimed toward the wind, whatever the biggest winds are, The fire pit chamber should be about 10 inches or 25 centimeters in diameter and positioned downwind of the oxygen chamber. And it should be about 5 to 6 inches or 8 to 10 centimeters or so between the two holes. And that's for the space for the tunnel in between the two holes. So dig the first hole and, remove any grass from the area. Dig the two holes. The first hole is the oxygen chamber. You want to dig a hole slightly downward slope so the air can go in it. And so you want a reliable draft that will send air directly to the base of the fire and keep the oxygen feeding the fire. The diameter of the fire hole should be bigger than the diameter of the oxygen hole. So then you want to dig the second hole. When you finish digging the oxygen chamber, you move on to the fire chamber. You want it to be downwind of the oxygen chamber and about 9 to 10 inches in diameter. It needs to be large enough to hold a small fire comfortably. The biggest advantage of a Dakota fire pit in the zombie apocalypse is it can't be seen by zombies. That's pretty much the whole point. The biggest advantage used to be in a windy area, you're not going to set, say, the plains on fire. If you think of the grasslands and things like that, on a windy day, you have a fire in grassland, you're going to burn everything down. So you dig a hole, you keep the fire contained, and you're able to cook over it, right? So you want the airflow to be solid. Otherwise, the fire dies from lack of oxygen. So the thing is, because of the design and the fact that there's air blowing in, you don't use as much fuel for this fire. It also burns a little bit hotter. You have some smoke, but it is much less smoke than a regular campfire produces. So right there are several advantages to keep zombies away. It is not visible to zombies, and the smoke is minimal. it's just really good for concealment. And it's a little easier to manage than a regular campfire, because it's contained. So, anyway, if the soil is too sandy, it won't work. And if there are lots of tree roots or rocks, digging is going to be a pain in the butt. So, there are going to be some places where this isn't going to be the best idea, right? However, if you're looking to be cooking outdoors and you have the right soil for it, it is great for cooking. It is bad for keeping you warm. This is not a fire that's going to keep you warm because it's in the ground. The fire would really need to be more of a campfire if you're looking for warmth, because this is pretty much a cooking fire. Um, Rain is going to destroy your chances of doing a Dakota Fire hole because, both holes are going to fill up with water. And much like paper beats rock, water beats fire. So, if it's a storm, not going to be the best time to build one of these. And when you're done, you just rebury those holes, you just put the dirt back, basically. So I hope that explanation is a little more specific and a little bit clearer, because in my last recording, I didn't talk about the fire hole needing to be downwind of the oxygen hole. I didn't really explain too much about needing a downward slope for the oxygen hole, or that hole being smaller than the fire hole. I left quite a few details out. I feel like I shared the gist, but not the specifics. And, this isn't something you're going to be able to make on a beach because the sand will not hold its shape well enough for you to do this. Unless it's wet sand, in which case that's its own problem because, wet beats fire. Anyway, a Dakota Fire hole won't be perfect in every situation, but if you need a cooking fire and you have a flat place that is easily diggable, it is probably your best bet to avoid detection from zombies. And the fire burns pretty hot. So if you have a couple of rocks to put your pan on, that's going to be your best bet. So yeah, those are the more specific ways to make a Dakota Fire hole, and I am sorry that my last message to you guys, I shortened it so much. I think I got the general idea across, but I didn't actually convey the specifics as well as I should have. So apologies all around on that front. And yeah, that is one of the best ways to cook outdoors without catching everything on fire on a windy day, without being detected, and to use quite a bit less firewood, fuel, etc. And the fire you build in it is this, it's building a fire has all the same principles, so whether it is a campfire or a Dakota fire, you start with leaves or paper or twigs, etc., and gradually add bigger fuel once the fire gets going. So anyway, I hope this helps you in the future if you need it. I have heard back from a couple of the people here who have made those, and they have successfully had a Dakota fire without the zombies coming to get them. They were able to cook their food, rebury it, not the food, the fire pit, and move on with zombies none the wiser. And there was one group of people who said, they knew zombies were nearby, but they were, how sometimes the zombies go weirdly dormant? They just sort of stand there, not moving, like somebody flipped a switch and the switch is set to off. I think in all of the movies and TV shows prior to the actual outbreak we saw, they would just sort of shamble along, constantly moving. And what we have found is, the actual zombies that we have here, sometimes a whole group of them will just like go to sleep, or I keep using the analogy they're like puppets, and I think it's like the puppeteer's busy elsewhere, and so there's nobody pulling the strings on these particular zombie marionettes. Um, And the thing is, you make a loud enough noise or you do something right in front of them, you draw attention to yourself in any way, you break rule number 5 in any way, they come out of the dormant state instantly moving to come get you. So, I don't know if sleep is the right word. Dormant implies that they're dormant for a specific period of time, but I still feel like they see, they hear, they smell. It's just maybe a little bit duller than their senses normally are. So, this family was able to, well, I don't, this family group, we've made our own families at this point. They were able to sneak past them just fine. And they were tired, they were starving, and so they were only about a half mile away when they made their Dakota Fire hole. And they kept quiet. They made the food, ate the food, and got out of there. But if it had been an actual campfire fire, they know that they would have been spotted. They weren't so far away that the zombies wouldn't have been able to detect them, because we've had zombies show up from a mile away before or 2 miles away, where somebody was like, well, they're 2 miles back, they can't possibly see us, let's risk a fire, and then blammo, the zombies they passed 2 miles back show up. So this worked really, really well for them. Nothing is foolproof. One of the things that the zombie apocalypse has shown us all is no matter how much we try, we are going to attract zombies sometimes if we are quiet and just existing. Sometimes zombies just sort of happen to us, and it's really no one's to blame when that happens. Not that blame helps in any of these situations, but one of the things with blame is if you survive the encounter, you can talk about, okay, so what we will not do next time is XYZ. And so, what we won't do next time is build a fire outdoors while cooking rabbit, or something. So, anyway, I hope this helps you on your journeys and travels, and or just helps you survive. And I know all of you are sick of me saying, go to the library, go to a bookstore, do this, do that. But there are so many books about surviving in the wild. And right now, if you're not in a settlement, or even if you are in a settlement, we are all basically trying to survive in the wild. So those books will help you. Those books are your friend. We don't have the internet to just get on and look things up. We don't have the information highway. We have to seek out that information. And there are a lot of books out there on how to do this kind of thing. There are homesteading magazines that can also help with various things, especially now that we're getting back into planting season and it's time to grow food. I think one of the things all of us are really focused on is growing food, storing food, keeping food, and all of those things. The library has a ton of information to help with that. So, you want more specifics or you want visuals. Um, if you can get a library cleared out, and honestly, most of the libraries we've been to, they're zombie free. Zombies tend to not be in buildings like libraries, because if they didn't die inside the library, they're not opening the door to go in, they can kind of beat down something, but unless there's a reason to, they don't. So most of the libraries we've encountered and bookstores we've encountered have been empty. There have been a few instances where somebody who was bitten has gotten into a retail space, has gotten into a library or a store, where it was crowded enough in that library or store that they then turned and bit everyone in sight, and, you know, everybody kind of got turned. But go through all of the steps of clearing a building, and the first one is knock on the door to see if any zombies come to the door. Try to keep an ear out. They have a very distinctive sound. At this point, most of them have a very distinctive smell. So, don't go trusting that every library is clear. Treat every building you go to as if it is zombie infested until you know for sure differently. And the best way to do that is make some noise on the door, especially if it's a glass door. And most libraries have glass front doors, at least the ones in our areas do. So pound on the door, see who comes to the door, and then deal with what you have to deal with. And if nobody comes to the door after 5 minutes, 10, if you want to be real certain you don't have an ankle biter who's crawling by their fingertips, you can easily go in and make use of the library. Most libraries still have card catalogs. There are a few libraries that have gone completely digital, but card catalogs are your friends. And if nothing else, you can usually go through the books and find the section that is outdoor survival or gardening or agriculture, whatever it is that you are there searching for. So yeah, and magazines. A lot of times they have magazines too, and they have CDs, DVDs, audiobooks on CD, movies on DVDs. If you are like we are at the station where you have access to a solar panel and audiovisual equipment, those items of entertainment can be lifesavers. It reminds us of a time when we had leisure time in and leisure time to spare. And sometimes just being somewhere where everyone is enjoying an audiobook together or everybody is enjoying a movie or a TV show together, it's a bonding experience. Some people have a hard time with this. I'll be real honest. Sometimes when you're watching shows and reading books, you're reminded so keenly of the world that was, that simply isn't anymore, that it's a bit heartbreaking. But more often than not, we all bond with it and we all go, oh my God, what I wouldn't give for something we saw in the movie, something we saw on the TV show. And not everybody is lucky enough to have solar panels that are working for them. You know, not everybody has that advantage. But if you go to a settlement or visit a settlement that does have that advantage, ask to watch a movie. Ask to listen to an audiobook. Try to do something that used to be normal, something that you used to find relaxing. Right now, those who used to garden for relaxation are now having to garden for survival. And it feels very different to grow food in order to survive the apocalypse than it does to grow food because it's something you enjoy. It's a very different beast entirely. Some people would do canning because they enjoyed canning. They enjoyed taking the fruits of their garden and, the vegetables of their garden and preserving them and all of the different ways there were to preserve them. And that was fun for them. Whereas now it's a matter of life or death. And so doing something else for fun is important. We had a lot of people who used to love to sew and knit and crochet for fun, and now we're having to do those things in order to have blankets and scarves and clothes without holes. And once you switch something from a hobby into a life requirement, it is no longer as relaxing because the stakes are so much higher. And when the stakes are higher, the portion of those activities that allowed you to relax, that allowed you to relieve yourself of the stresses of the day, instead the activity itself becomes part of the stresses of your day. And so trying to find something like sharing stories by candlelight, reading books to each other out loud, watching something on a television screen if you have power somewhere. All of those things can mean so much more now than they did before. Any communal activity is a bonding experience these days. There are so many times where we have watched a movie at the station, and when we've got done, we have laughed, we have cried. We've cried about the stuff that we saw that we missed. We've laughed about how easy we had it and didn't know, and groaned about some stuff that just seemed so stupid and petty in comparison to what we're dealing with now. Rom-coms are especially hilarious right now because so many of the problems in them seem so far away and so petty. It's almost like watching a farce, and making fun of whatever you've just seen is pretty therapeutic. It's relaxing and it's fun. So, in short, libraries are your friend, and a lot of libraries even lend out equipment. Some libraries would have VCRs, even still, that they would loan out to people. They would have DVD players that they would loan out to people. Some of them have seed libraries that they would allow people to, check seeds out and that sort of thing. Some of them would have fishing equipment for people to borrow and go fishing and come back with, all of which are tools for your survival. So I know I keep harping on libraries, but libraries are a lifeline. So make sure that you're utilizing them because you can learn about things like how to build a Dakota Fire, how to do different survival things that we're all having to learn. And we're getting a crash course on it right now. And more than just the survival aspect, libraries have books that can entertain, that can educate, that can make life a little bit more livable. A lot of times when we are doing a bunch of canning and when we're processing a bunch of the fruits and vegetables we've grown, somebody's reading aloud to us. Or we have some kind of speaker setup where we're listening to a book together. A lot of times we talk, but a lot of times we're listening to a story because it keeps our mind occupied while our hands and bodies are busy doing something else. Don't get so bogged down in survival and being in survival mode that you forget that humans need joy, we need play, we need diversion in order to want to survive. Those are the things that make life worth living. Those are the things that we can talk about amongst ourselves. Those are things that teach us empathy and help us produce joy. And, those little moments of joy that we find make all of the work that we're having to do just to survive so much more bearable. So I probably won't shut up about libraries, because they really are such a useful resource on kind of every level that there is. But, I will say, if you have kids that are in your group, getting books to read to children, a lot of these children have been robbed of their childhood, and if you can give them any little bit of that childhood back, books are a good way to do it, especially for young kids where they have pictures and you can, ideally give them the love of reading. We can't let reading go out of style because it's going to be the only entertainment we have for a while. So, anyway, I hope that you have found a community. If you have not, I hope you find one soon. And until then, survive, survive, survive.